The hallway outside the apartment felt unusually quiet after the long journey. My body was exhausted from traveling, but my mind was full of excitement. I had imagined this moment many times during the flight. I thought Gideon would be shocked when he saw me standing there without warning. I even smiled to myself while placing my suitcase beside the door. For a moment I just stood there, listening. At first it was only soft voices, but then I heard the sound of a woman laughing. It wasn't a quick laugh like someone visiting for a moment. It sounded relaxed, like she felt completely at home. My hand slowly moved away from the door handle as my heart started beating faster. Then Gideon spoke again. His tone was light and casual, the way people speak when they feel comfortable. The sound of his voice didn't carry the tension or distance I had heard during our recent phone calls. Instead, he sounded warm, almost playful. I couldn't understand every word clearly through the door, but one sentence came through sharply enough to make my stomach drop. He said he still had plenty of time before I returned. For a second I wondered if I misunderstood. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe a neighbor had stopped by and I was imagining the rest because I was tired from traveling. But another laugh followed, closer this time, and I heard footsteps moving across the living room floor. The same floor I had helped choose when we renovated the place. A strange feeling spread through my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was confusion mixed with a slow realization that something wasn't right. I looked down at my suitcase, still sitting beside the door, and suddenly the idea of surprising him didn't feel exciting anymore. It felt like I had walked into a moment I was never supposed to see. My fingers tightened around the door handle as I stood there in silence, realizing that whatever waited on the other side of that door was about to change everything. 6 years earlier, my life looked simple and steady. Gideon and I met in Denver at the engineering firm where we both worked. We weren't the type of couple that rushed into things. Our relationship grew slowly through long workdays, shared lunches, and quiet evenings talking about our plans for the future. What first drew me to Gideon was his calm personality. He never raised his voice and always seemed thoughtful before making decisions. When problems appeared at work, he was the person everyone trusted to handle them carefully. That steadiness made me feel safe with him. After 2 years of dating, we got married and started building a life together. We bought a modest house and spent weekends fixing small things around it. Some days we painted walls, other days we worked in the yard or assembled furniture. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it felt real and stable. When the opportunity came for me to take an overseas engineering contract, I was nervous about leaving for so long. The project was important for my career, but it meant months away from home. I worried that the distance would put pressure on our marriage. Gideon was the one who convinced me to accept it. He told me opportunities like that didn't come often and that he was proud of me. He said he would take care of everything at home and that the time apart would pass quickly. During the first months of the assignment, we talked often. Our conversations were simple but comforting. He would describe small things happening at the house, like repairs he was planning or neighbors he had spoken with. Hearing those details made the distance feel easier. Because the project paid well, I decided to send part of my salary home regularly. My goal was to reduce the mortgage faster so that we could have more financial freedom later. It felt like we were both working toward the same future, even while living in different places. At that time, I never doubted our relationship. I believed the trust between us was strong enough to handle the months apart. I stayed very still outside the door, trying to understand what I was hearing. The voices inside continued like everything was normal. I heard the sound of glasses touching each other, followed by another short laugh. It sounded like two people enjoying a relaxed evening together. The woman's voice carried clearly through the quiet hallway. She spoke as if she felt comfortable in the space, asking questions and making small comments about the house. Nothing about her tone sounded unsure or nervous. A moment later, I heard Gideon answer her. His voice sounded light, almost proud. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. He told her that I wasn't expected back for at least 3 more months. He spoke casually, like it was a simple fact that made their evening easier. The woman responded with another laugh. She said the place looked beautiful and asked if he had designed everything himself. Her words were full of admiration, like she was impressed by what she saw around her. Gideon answered quickly. He said the house had come together because of careful planning and smart choices. His tone carried a quiet confidence. Hearing that made my mind race. I knew exactly how much effort had gone into building that home. I remembered the long workdays, the overtime hours, and the decisions about where every dollar should go. The house wasn't just a building to me. It was the result of years of planning and sacrifice. Inside, their conversation continued easily. They talked about small things, like the furniture and the renovations we had finished before I left for my assignment. The woman sounded impressed with every detail she noticed. I stood there without moving, trying to process what was happening. The door in front of me suddenly felt like a barrier between two completely different realities. On one side was the life I believed I had built. On the other side was something I had never expected to find waiting for me. I finally turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was filled with warm light from the lamps, and the smell of food and wine hung in the air. It looked like a quiet evening that had been planned carefully. Gideon was sitting on the couch, leaning back in a relaxed way. Beside him sat a woman with long dark hair. They both turned toward the door the moment it opened. For a second, neither of them understood what they were seeing. Then Gideon's face changed. His eyes widened and all the color disappeared from his face. He looked like someone who had just been caught doing something he never expected anyone to witness. The woman quickly stood up from the couch. She looked from Gideon to me and back again, clearly confused. She didn't know who I was yet, but she could tell something was wrong. The room fell into complete silence. My suitcase was still in my hand as I stepped a little farther inside. I didn't rush, and I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood there and looked around the room. Gideon suddenly started talking. His words came out quickly and unevenly, like he was trying to find an explanation before the silence grew worse. He said I was misunderstanding the situation and that things weren't what they looked like. But the scene around us told its own story. 2 wine glasses rested on the table. A bottle stood open beside them. A few candles burned slowly, giving the room a soft glow that felt far too intimate for a casual visit. Near the chair by the window hung a coat that didn't belong to me. That chair had always been my spot in the evenings. I used to sit there after work, reading or talking with Gideon about our day. I looked at the coat, then back at the two of them. There was no confusion left in my mind anymore. Whatever explanation Gideon tried to form, it couldn't erase what was right in front of me. After the silence stretched too long, the tension in the room became impossible to ignore. Gideon kept trying to speak, but his words were slow and uncertain. At first, he repeated that nothing serious was happening. He said Betrayal was only a friend who had come over to talk. But the explanation didn't last long. The more he tried to defend himself, the more his story started to fall apart. His voice grew quieter, and he avoided looking directly at me. Betrayal stood nearby, listening carefully, her expression slowly changing as she realized she had walked into something much bigger than she expected. Eventually Gideon stopped pretending. His shoulders dropped slightly, and he admitted that Betrayal had been coming to the house for quite some time. At first, he said, they had only spent time together talking and keeping each other company. Then he admitted that things had changed not long after that. Their relationship had started only a few weeks after I left for my assignment. The timeline was clear enough that there was no room for misunderstanding. Gideon tried to explain the reason behind it. He said the house had felt empty after I left. Every room reminded him of the routines we used to share. According to him, the quiet evenings became harder to handle as the weeks passed. He said he felt alone managing everything by himself. The responsibilities of the house, the bills, and daily life had started to feel overwhelming. But while he spoke, I noticed something important. His explanations focused mostly on how difficult things had been for him. He talked about loneliness and pressure, but he never mentioned the choices he had made during that time. I looked around the room again, realizing something that made the situation even clearer. He had continued living comfortably in the home we built together while slowly creating a new life inside it. What struck me the most was how normal the whole situation seemed to him. It felt like he never truly believed this moment would happen. That night I didn't stay long in the house. After the conversation ended, I walked to the bedroom and packed a few clothes into a small bag. I moved slowly and quietly, not saying anything more. Gideon watched from the hallway but didn't try to stop me. A few minutes later, I walked out the front door again. This time I left the suitcase behind. I only carried the small bag with the things I needed for a few days. I found a simple hotel across town and checked into a small room. It wasn't comfortable or special, but it gave me space to think without distractions. During the first night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying everything that had happened. But instead of letting the anger take control, I focused on understanding the situation clearly. Over the next few days, I began looking through documents I still had access to. I opened old emails, bank statements, and files connected to the house and our shared finances. I paid attention to every detail. The mortgage records showed exactly where most of the payments had come from. The renovation expenses, the furniture purchases, and even many of the utility payments had been connected to my income over the past several years. Seeing everything written down made the situation clearer than before. The house Gideon enjoyed living in had been supported mostly by the money I earned during long hours of work. Even while I was overseas, large portions of my salary continued to cover the same expenses. I also reviewed the contracts connected to our property and the accounts we used together. Some of the legal details were things Gideon had never paid much attention to. But I had always been careful about paperwork. As I continued studying those documents, I started to understand something important. Gideon believed he had complete control over the life inside that house. What he didn't realize was that the structure holding that life together was far more connected to me than he ever noticed. And that misunderstanding was about to change everything for him. After organizing the documents, I realized I needed professional advice before making any decisions. A colleague from work had once mentioned a reliable lawyer, so I contacted him and scheduled a meeting. His name was Everett Harlow. A few days later, I sat across from him in his office with a folder full of financial papers and property records. Everett listened carefully while I explained the situation. He didn't interrupt much. Instead, he quietly reviewed the documents one by one. The meeting lasted longer than I expected. Everett examined the mortgage papers, bank statements, and several agreements connected to our shared accounts. He asked a few questions to understand how our finances had been handled during the past few years. When he finished reviewing everything, he leaned back in his chair and explained something important. According to the records, most of the major payments connected to the house had come directly from my income. The mortgage contributions, large renovation costs, and several other expenses were clearly linked to my accounts. There were also legal agreements connected to some of the investments used for the property. Those agreements created protections that Gideon probably never paid attention to when we signed them. Everett explained that these details mattered more than Gideon likely understood. The house might have looked like a shared success from the outside, but legally the financial structure behind it told a more complicated story. Hearing that information didn't make me feel excited or angry. Instead, it gave me a clear understanding of the position I was in. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation or public arguments. That kind of reaction would only create more chaos. What I wanted was something simpler and stronger. I wanted the situation to unfold in a way that showed the real consequences of Gideon's decisions. The comfort he enjoyed inside that house existed because of choices we made together, but he had treated those choices carelessly. Now the same legal details he ignored were going to shape what happened next. And this time I would be the one making the decisions. 2 weeks passed before I returned to the house. This time I didn't arrive alone. Everett walked beside me, carrying a thin folder that held the documents we had prepared. When Gideon opened the door, his expression showed surprise, but it quickly changed into something closer to confidence. He probably thought I had come back because I needed answers or emotional closure. He stepped aside and allowed us to enter. The living room looked almost the same as before. The furniture was arranged neatly, and everything appeared calm on the surface. But the mood in the room changed the moment Everett introduced himself. Gideon looked confused at first. He asked why a lawyer was involved. Everett remained calm and explained that we were there to discuss the legal situation connected to the property and finances. Brielle was sitting in a chair near the window again. She watched the conversation quietly, clearly unsure about what was happening. Everett opened the folder and began explaining the documents in simple terms. He pointed out how the mortgage payments were structured and how several investments connected to the house were registered. The explanation was direct and professional. Most of the financial responsibility tied to the property had come from my income and accounts. Because of that structure, the legal control over several major assets leaned heavily in my favor. At first Gideon tried to interrupt, saying the house belonged to both of us equally. But Everett calmly showed him the details written in the agreements we had signed years earlier. As the conversation continued, Gideon's confident attitude slowly faded. The certainty he had at the beginning of the meeting began to disappear. Brielle listened carefully as the information became clearer. The situation she thought she understood was turning into something completely different. The future Gideon had likely described to her no longer looked stable. For the first time since everything started, Gideon's expression changed into something I hadn't seen before. He looked uncertain, and for a moment, genuinely worried about what was coming next. In the months after the confrontation, everything Gideon had taken for granted began to change. The house, once a symbol of his comfort, was sold as part of the legal separation. The money from the sale went mostly into my accounts, leaving him with far less than he had imagined. Without my income supporting the lifestyle he had grown used to, he began to feel the pressure of managing on his own. Monthly bills that once seemed manageable now became stressful. He had to reconsider the spending habits he had assumed would never be questioned. Brielle, who had been part of his life so easily before, began to step back. As she saw the situation clearly, the future she had imagined with him suddenly became uncertain. The excitement of the relationship faded when the reality of finances, legal control, and instability became apparent. Gideon tried to hold on to the life he thought he had built, but the illusions shattered one by one. Friends who had previously visited for dinners or casual weekends stopped showing up. The home, once filled with warmth and laughter, grew quiet. He started facing the consequences of choices he had made while underestimating the situation and the person he had betrayed. Everything he had relied on for comfort was no longer secure. For the first time, the man who used to joke about how peaceful it was without me saw the real cost of his actions. The empty rooms, the silent evenings, and the absence of those who had once made the house feel alive reminded him of what he had lost. Elena had moved forward, but Gideon was left to navigate a life he had assumed would always be easy. The comfort he thought he deserved came crashing down, not with anger or chaos, but through the consequences of his own choices. And in that quiet, empty house, he finally understood that the life he had taken for granted was no longer his to enjoy. After everything settled, I decided it was time to start fresh. I moved to a new city, far from the memories tied to the house and the betrayal. The place I chose was smaller, simpler, and entirely my own. I signed all the papers in my name, making it clear that this home was built on my efforts alone. The process wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt the weight of everything that had happened, the lies, the trust broken, and the life I thought I had. It was painful to think about how long I had worked to build a life with someone who had turned against me. But slowly, a new clarity began to take shape. I realized that the betrayal, as painful as it was, hadn't ended my life. Instead, it had shown me truths I might never have faced otherwise. It revealed who Gideon really was, what I truly deserved, and how much strength I had inside me. I spent my first few weeks in the new home unpacking not just boxes, but memories. Each item I placed was a reminder of independence, a small victory that I didn't have to rely on anyone else for security or happiness. The silence in the rooms no longer felt empty, It felt like space I had earned. The trust one once had in Gideon, the life we built together, and the plans we made, they were gone. But their absence made room for something far more valuable. I had control over my own life again. I had independence, confidence, and the freedom to make decisions without fear of betrayal. Most importantly, I learned that revenge didn't need to be loud or dramatic. The quietest, most lasting kind of revenge is simply moving forward stronger than the person who tried to break you. Every day in my new home reminded me that I was capable of more than I had imagined. The pain from the past didn't define me, it strengthened me. And as I looked around at the life I was building for myself, I finally felt the peace that comes from knowing I would never let anyone take advantage of my sacrifices again.